very good evening to all of you and warm greetings from Bhopal. I thank you all for inviting me on this day. On this day to talk about one of the grossest human rights violations in this country, in which 500,000 people have been denied their right to a life of dignity, denied justice against the corporate criminals who are responsible for their continuing misery. Few words about the city of Bhopal. As you know, it's the capital of Madhya Pradesh. It was made the capital in 1955. In 1984, it had about 1 million people. And the city of Bhopal is actually three cities. There is the old Bhopal, which is the much older part of the city. And then you have the new Bhopal, which has most of the politicians, ministers, and the officials, bureaucrats, industrialists, the posh part. And then you have a third part, which is further south, which is the industrial township of Bharat Heavy Electricals, which has about 20,000 workers and their families. And the demographics, particularly in terms of the religious divide, is interesting. That in old Bhopal you have about 51% Hindus and 49% Muslims, and this also has there is a reason why I mentioned this. And in New Bhopal, in Old Bhopal, there is 51% Hindus, about 49% Muslims, very small number of other religions. And then in New Bhopal, you have about 10% Muslims and 90% Hindus. And as it happens historically and even till today, there is hardly any interaction between Old Bhopal and New Bhopal. Old Bhopal is basically the older, poorer part of the city. So, as it happens in every other city, has happened, there has been a lot of migration into Bhopal from surrounding districts, from the late 50s and early 60s, when Green Revolution was taking root in Madhya Pradesh and around those areas. So there was a lot of people who came into the city, were uprooted because there was land consolidation in the nearby areas, and there were many who had to leave because of the many reasons that poor people have to leave their homesteads. There have been caste operations and other things that were happening around the districts. So basically, most of these people, they gathered in the northern part of the city that already had poor people settled down, because that part of the city, because it used to be a walled city at one point of time, and the northern part was the part where there was place for people to settle, because the southern part is these huge lakes that Bhopal is famous for. And the two other east and west side, you have hills, not exactly conducive for settlement. So as I was saying, the northern part had essentially most of the poor people settling down. People uprooted from their villages also settled in these northern parts. Now, and in 1969, an American multinational called Union Carbide Corporation, through its Indian subsidiary, Union Carbide India Limited, which incidentally had its headquarters in Calcutta, Union Carbide India Limited, Union Carbide Corporation USA had majority stakes in Union Carbide India Limited. They had 51% stakes. So essentially all the decisions were made by UCC USA. So in 1969, UCC USA decided to set up a formulation unit in Bhopal to produce pesticides, because there was this Malwa region where a lot of cotton is grown, because it has black cotton soil. A lot of cotton is grown. And as many of you may know, cotton is one of the crops in which pesticides is used the most. So with a view to be able to sell pesticides into this cotton growing area, Union Carbide wanted to locate this formulation unit in the northern part of Bhopal. The other advantages that it had was access, because it was Bhopal is centrally located, almost in this geographical center of the country, that there were railway lines and communication was easy, so they thought that this would be a good place to start this factory to sell products all over the country, and particularly in the Malwa region. So in 1969, a formulation unit came up in the midst of rather densely populated settlements. Union Carbide later claimed that the factory came first and people came later, but that's a lie, like many other lies the corporation tells. Because there are lies because there are villages that have been there for more than 250 years. There are actually documentary evidence for that. So in the midst of this populated settlement, Union Carbide set up its formulation unit and started formulating different brands of pesticides like Feridol, Sevin and Temic that it had already been producing in USA. Union Carbide had a similar factory in USA, that will come later. And so in 69 it started producing. In 73 was the first time Union Carbide presented a proposal. This proposal was to go to backwardly integrate the production of the formulation of pesticides, to actually produce the ingredients that goes into the pesticides. And one of the chief ingredients was methyl isocyanate that were used to produce carbamate pesticides. So in 73, this proposal, and we have got a copy of this proposal, and what we find in this proposal is, this proposal has about between 25 and 30% cost reduction if you compare it with the Institute West Virginia plant producing the same chemical, methyl isocyanate. And these cost reductions were essentially achieved by having material substitution, construction material substitution, like the US plant was, a lot of the pipelines and the tanks were made of stainless steel, whereas the Bhopal plant, mild steel was used, which is much cheaper. And there were a lot of different features, like safety features, that were absent in the Bhopal plant, in the design made for the Bhopal plant. The waste management system was also different from the American design. Here they were talking about surface disposal of the waste that would be generated during the production of methyl isocyanate. And the interesting part is this particular proposal, which of course showed that the plant was deliberately hazardously designed, this particular proposal had the approval of an 11-member managing committee, in which Warren Anderson, who was later to become the chairman of the company, was a member. So the chairman, actually, the guy who later became the chairman, actually approved this hazardous design, both in terms of the plant and in terms of the waste management system. So the actual erection of the plant began in 79. But before that, there had been another round of cost cutting. In 1977, there was a review of the costs involved, and overall they figured that it was possible, if you didn't pay any attention to safety and other features, then it was possible to cut down costs even more. And in 1980, yet another time there was cost cutting, which was part of the corporation's global economy drive. So as part of this global economy drive, Union Carbide's management in Bhopal decided to cut down the number of workers to half. So earlier there were 1,200 odd workers, and they cut it down to about 632 workers, which meant that while if the maintenance crew had 6 workers earlier, it became 2 workers later. So maintenance became sloppy. While earlier workers had to undergo some 6 months of safety training, that period of safety training was cut down to 15 days. So you have a fresh graduate coming into the company, getting 15 days of safety training, and then told to take charge of some hazardous unit. This was happening. So and then as part of this cost cutting, they also shut down a plant, a refrigeration unit that was vital to the safety of the plant, because what the refrigeration unit did, it kept the MIC in the storage tank at sub-zero temperatures, which was what was stipulated, which is how it is done in the Institute West Virginia plant in the US. They shut down the refrigeration unit to save something like $70 a day. And as a result of all of these actions, the retrenchment, the design changes, the cutting down of safety features like the refrigeration unit, it immediately had consequences. And the consequences in terms of accidents within the factory, it meant that there were, at a point of time, up to 40 workers getting exposed and getting hospitalized with severe respiratory distress and other problems. And eventually it led to the death of one worker, Ashraf Mohammed, in December 81. And because all of this information had to be sent to the headquarters, Union Carbide Corporation's headquarters were in Danbury, Connecticut, USA. So these information about workers getting injured, workers getting hospitalized, Ashraf Mohammed dying, all of these had been sent to the headquarters. And in May 82, a team of engineers came from Charleston, West Virginia to do a safety audit. And this team found out that there were at least 30 major hazards in the factory, 11 of which were in the MIC-7 unit, which is where the disaster occurred. As the audit team found out these problems, but nothing was done on these problems because it was the season of cost cutting. And the other big reason was Union Carbide management by then, because they were not able to sell as much pesticides as they wanted to, as they thought they would, because of insufficient rains and other conditions. They had already made up their mind to sell this plant to a firm in Brazil or in Indonesia, and which led to further lack of safety, which led to people actually leaving. The safety officer, Mr. Kamal Parikh, actually resigned because he was not heard, and all of this was happening. So, like I said, the safety audit team's recommendations were not followed up. And the other part that was happening was, and in this way, the Bhopal, the workers who worked in that plant, they distinguished themselves, because this doesn't happen usually, is that once the workers found out that safety features were missing, that there were people getting exposed, people dying, that the workers took this up in a very strong way. The workers opposed. They worked, and we have all the documentary evidence of that. The strong letters they wrote. They wrote letters to the factory inspectors, to the industry department. They sent letters to Warren Anderson in Danbury, Connecticut. They wrote letters to the management in the plant there. But the result of all this was that one after another, the worker leaders, whoever took an active part, was victimized, charged with trumped-up cases, trumped-up charges, and false cases were brought against them, and they were made to leave. They were sacked. So, as a result of these policies, what eventually happened that by 83, 84, they had the most pliant people as the leaders of the union, of the official union, who would basically say that they were helpless. They could not do anything. So with these things building up, it's like a ticking time bomb. With the safety features going, with workers being less trained in safety, and with the workers' right to express and their indignation at the occupational hazard conditions being taken away, essentially a situation was building in which a disaster could occur any day. And in fact, in September 1984, a disaster, exactly what happened in December 84, exactly like that happened in the Institute West Virginia plant, which is water entered the tank, there was a exothermic reaction, but this was a much smaller tank. One of the ways that Indian Carbide Corporation saved money against their own engineers saying that the tank should be much smaller, they didn't pay heed to that because one large tank meant that you could save money. And overall, from 1973's proposal to the way the factory operated till 84, you can see that the factory was run on just one policy, which is profit maximization. Profit maximization at all costs. That is what's happening. So nothing about the incident at Institute West Virginia, the leak of MIC, small quantity of MIC in Institute West Virginia in September 84 was not communicated to, at least not to the workers. So nobody got to know about it. And one of the practices of Indian Carbide also in that plant, which is not done in chemical plants anyway, hopefully not done, we don't know, but was that they would take, there are lots of valves in those pipelines, so they would recondition the valves. If a valve gets corroded or eroded, they would take the valve out, deposit material on it, grind it, finish it, and put it back. This was one of the usual practices inside that plant. And the other chief difference from the Institute West Virginia plant was that the monitoring systems, the gauges, they were very different from what you had in the Institute West Virginia plant. You had online continuous monitoring of temperature, of pressure in the Institute West Virginia plant, but not in the Bhopal plant, which was dependent on manual recording. And that used to happen once in a shift of 8 hours. So that again was one of the contributing factors. So on this particular evening of 2nd December 84, the workers were cleaning the lines through what's called water lancing. You direct a jet, high velocity jet of water onto the walls of the pipeline and remove the methyl isocyanate that solidified around the walls to make space so that the material could move. So that's what they were doing. But because the valves were the ones that were reconditioned, they were leaking, and because the tank that was supposed to have positive nitrogen pressure so that nothing enters from outside, and it didn't, it actually did not have any positive pressure at all, that the water that was used for lancing leaked through those valves and entered the tank. And then water MIC reaction is an exothermic reaction generating a lot of heat, and the heat again makes the reaction go faster. So what you had was that as the reaction went faster, it went faster and faster with generation of more and more heat, and it became something that could not be controlled. It's what's called a runaway reaction, like a runaway horse. And this led to so much pressure that the valve, the safety valve, just ruptured, and the gas started leaking from about 100 feet high. Now there is all the safety systems that were supposed to work, like the vent gas scrubber, which was supposed to neutralize with caustic soda. That night it did not have caustic soda in it. There was a flare tower that should have had a pilot flame burning that would set alight any escaping gas. That night the flame was absent. Then even if there's gas escaping, you could direct the water jets to it and dissolve the gas and turn it into dimethylurea, which is relatively non-toxic. The water jets never reached that point, that 100 feet point where the gas is leaking. So methyl isocyanate, which is heavier than air, and that was a cold December night, and we are talking of a little after midnight. The surroundings, it was a Sunday, people were sleeping. There was no siren about the leak. So by the time people woke up, and now it's different, now that you have pakka houses there, but at that time they were mostly mud thatch houses. So gas could enter. There would be many ways for the gases to enter, not just from the roof, but from the walls. There were holes in the walls. So essentially, most people today, when you ask them, they will tell you that when they woke up coughing and feeling choked and their eyes burning, and because the gases had already entered, and the gases had actually surrounded the entire city, and of Old Bhopal. And between Old Bhopal and New Bhopal, you have these two big lakes, and you have the topography is such that you have two hills on either side, on the east and west, and you have the lakes on the south. So basically, people got up, woke up from sleep, feeling choked, feeling eyes burning, lungs on fire. They opened their doors, they got more gassed, and then they joined the mass of people who were running towards the government hospital, the Hamidia hospital. So basically, they ran in the direction of the wind. So we reckon that thousands of people could have been saved, and thousands could have been at least protected to some extent from the effects of the gas, if two things were done. One, somebody told them to run in the opposite direction of the wind, and two, if somebody told them to just keep a wet cloth on their mouth and nose, it could have happened. Many people could have been protected. But there was nobody. And the siren was off. And people ran in the direction of the wind. As they ran, they inhaled more and more of the gas. And because it was a pungent gas, basically a lot of fluid came out of their lungs when it went to the lungs. And many people were drowned in their own body fluids. So you see the pictures from that time, you'll find people with froth coming out of their mouth, like as happens when you drown somewhere. Many women aborted as they ran. Many people died because they were stepped upon. Many children got split up from their families and died under trucks or cars that were moving. So we are talking of 500,000 people exposed. And out of that, conservative estimates, some estimates go as far as 35,000, but at least 7,000 shrouds were distributed, and hundreds of bodies were buried or cremated without any shrouds. So we believe that at least 8,000 people died in the immediate aftermath of the disaster. And I was saying that the two things that could have saved thousands of lives, were not carried out. The government could have done that. But it is interesting to see what the government did. The first thing that the government did was to send vehicles to pick up the dead bodies that were on the streets and carry them in the vehicles and dump them into the Narmada River and into the forest. This was the first act of the government in playing down the consequences of the disaster, of the damage caused on the health and lives of the people. And as I will say in a little part, this exercise of playing down the damages has continued in the 29 years since the disaster. And so the immediate effect of the gas exposure, as I said, was 8,000 deaths, but also, as ICMR research has shown, what essentially happened was those who inhaled the gas, then the gases crossed the pulmonary barrier. The exact composition of the gas cloud is not known, but what is known from scientific papers that MIC was the largest component, but there was also other chemicals like hydrogen cyanide, like monomethylamine, carbon monoxide. All of these are products of thermal degradation of MIC. All of these were in that gas cloud. So, of course, hydrogen cyanide also must have killed quite a lot of people. So the methyl isocyanate, it crossed the pulmonary barrier and went into the bloodstream, and by going through reaching the different systems in the bodies, it caused damage to almost every system in the body. ICMR had started 24 research projects, so those studies plus other studies essentially show that the respiratory system, the eyes, the reproductive system, the musculoskeletal system, the immune system, which means that people are prone, like you find that the prevalence of tuberculosis is 4 to 5 times more in Bhopal than anywhere else. And so is recurrent infections among people, and a host of mental health problems, particularly anxiety disorders, panic attacks, and depression. And that was about 30% people were diagnosed with just mental illnesses. And so these were the main problems, but over the years, particularly in the last 10 years, we have seen an alarming rise of cancers among the people. We have seen, and this is a part of our research that we as Sambhavana Trust Clinic, of which I'm a part of, and our research shows that the generation that was conceived and born after the disaster, even they are marked by carbides poisons. Their growth is affected, physical growth and mental development is affected. And incidentally, much before Sambhavana Trust Clinic did that, ICMR had started a project that was clearly showing these effects, but we have documents to show that that particular project of ICMR, which clearly showed that the next generation was also marked by the poisons of carbide, was prematurely terminated. That study was discontinued in the face of opposition from its principal investigator, Professor of Pediatrics, Dr. N.R. Bhandari. Now, before I begin about the other ongoing disaster in Bhopal, I'll just throw some light on the healthcare situation. As I said right in the beginning, I forgot that, I haven't mentioned. But when people reached in thousands running from their homes to Hamidia Hospital, when they reached the hospital, doctors there were baffled. They didn't know what to do. They had never treated patients like that. So they called up Union Carbide's plant medical officer, Dr. Loya, L.D. Loya, and said, what do? We have these people coming, they're choked, they're feeling choked, they're restless, they're in acute respiratory distress, their eyes were swollen, what do we do? And the Dr. Loya from Union Carbide, he said what he was told to do by his higher officials, which was that, oh, don't worry, this is not a poisonous gas, this is just like tear gas. It is just a more potent tear gas. You just have to use water. And the doctors knew that that wasn't going to work because already hundreds of people were dying, and all around the hospital you had like a carpet of dead bodies. So, but interestingly, within 2 days of the disaster, there was a German toxicologist who came, Max Donder, and that German toxicologist, along with Dr. Hiresh Chandra, was the head of the forensic department in the medical college. Together they found out that if you gave sodium thiosulfate injection to people in their veins, then you had an excretion of the toxic product, which is the urinary thiocyanate. There was more thiocyanate in the urine once you gave that thiosulfate, and that had to be given for 7 days, and it showed that people's symptoms were much relieved after giving this injection. They were breathing better, they were eating better, they were less fatigued. But this again was discontinued very soon. This was the 10,000 ampules that Dr. Donder had brought were only given to the rich and powerful, and the poor people got nothing. And the Director General of Health Services, Dr. M.N. Nagu, issued a circular to all the doctors in Bhopal saying, use sodium thiosulfate only if you're sure of its effect. But nobody could be sure. Those were the times of uncertainty. So nothing could be done. And while all this was going on, ICMR was carrying out a double-blind clinical trial on what thiosulfate could do. And unfortunately, this trial, whose results showed that thiosulfate was indeed effective in detoxifying the body,